everyone, Effie here. Today I'm going to make this card using our Gardenia wishes and one of our new background stamps that we released in our November 2018 flash release. In that flash release, we have 7 new cling 6x6 red rubber background stamps. I will leave the link in the description box below where you can find more information and details on all of our new background stamps. So on with the project, I'm going to start off by white heat embossing our new glass windows background stamp onto some watercolor paper. I'm using Canson XL 140-pound paper, and I'll be using Kent Oliver Colorverse to do a little bit of watercoloring on this background. I'm using Prussian blue to create a nice, beautiful wash on the entire panel. So what I did first, I wet the panel with clean water first, and then I just applied some Prussian blue watercolor over the entire panel. And then while that paper or panel was still wet, I added a little bit more pigment into the square or geometric shapes of this background image. And that way I get a really nice contrast against the different shapes or images within this background. And I'm going to continue working on this panel while it's still wet, and I'm working fairly quickly. So after I created that wash, I just dropped in little bits of pigment into each of the windows, and you can see that some of the deeper concentration of pigment that I got outside of the lines, I kind of just blended a little bit of that out. But once I finished painting my background, I set it aside to dry completely, and then I went ahead and white heat embossed this cluster from our Gardenia Wishes stamp set onto some more watercolor paper. After I stamped the image using some embossing ink, I poured on some white embossing powder and hit the whole panel with my heat tool, melting all that powder. And then I'm going to start watercoloring the blooms. For the flowers or blooms, I'm using a combination of cadmium red. As you can see, I'm applying the cadmium red first with a larger tip water brush, and then I took a finer tip water brush to blend some of that color out towards the edges of my petals. And after I applied my first layer of light color, I went back in and added a deeper concentration of the cadmium red to the inner corners of my petals. After I finished with that base color of cadmium red, I actually went back in and I added a second shade of color to my blooms. For the second shade, I use Tangerine Colorverse, and I'm just going to add a little bit of tangerine to portions of my flower. I don't add the tangerine to every single petal. I kind of just drop it into some of the larger petals and also to some portions of the center of my flower. Then after I've applied a little bit of that tangerine pigment, I'm going to take a second clean brush and just blend a little bit of that tangerine out. I'm going to apply the same process to the 2 smaller blooms in this cluster. After I finish painting the blooms, I'm going to paint the leaves using a combination of phthalo green and olive green colorverse. Once I finished painting my Gardenia Wishes cluster, I just expedited the drying process by applying my heat gun to the panel. Next, I'm going to die cut the Gardenia Wishes cluster using the coordinating die. In addition, I'll be using the largest die from our double stitch rectangles large die collection to die cut my glass windows panel. And this is just going to die cut that panel into an A2 size card while adding stitches to the edges at the same time. Next, I'm going to stamp my sentiment, which is from our pen sentiment, onto some white cardstock. I'm going to create a fishtail banner. After I cut my banner down to size, I set it aside, and then I took a side folding A2 card base and applied or mounted that glass windows panel onto the base using some of our strong double-sided adhesive, which I already pre-cut into strips. Once my glass windows panel was mounted onto my top folding A2 card base, I popped up that Gardenia Wishes cluster onto the left hand side of my base. After I mounted it with some dimensional foam tape, I trimmed off all the excess pieces of that cluster using my IKEA scissors. Then I applied some additional foam mounting adhesive behind my sentiment strip, and then I mounted that right onto my card base, tucking the left end into my floral cluster. Now that all of my main elements were popped up on my card base, I just added some additional foam adhesive behind areas that still needed support. So this is what I like to do at the end of my card making process usually, and this is just going to make sure that there's no sagging parts on the card. Lastly, I just added some of our metallic silver sequins to embellish my card, and my project is now complete. I hope you all enjoyed today's card and video. Be sure to check out our flash release blog post for all the details on our new background stamps. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because I update it on a weekly basis. So thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next time.